Cigars are a complex experience, being made from rolled tobacco, a plant that carries a history as rich as its flavor. From an ancient medicine applied to open wounds, to pipes and the Spanish introduction that spread the plant across the world and birthed the cigar, all the way to now in a world dominated by cigarettes and synthetic nicotine, with cigars today being associated with slowing down, being introspective, and just enjoying the intricacies of a good stick. In this video, I'll explain where cigars started and how they became what they are today. It begins with the plant itself in the southern Americas, more than 1,000 years before Europe even knew there was a new world. Indigenous peoples, such as the Arawak people, would use tobacco regularly for religious ceremonies, healing practices, and more. Initially, the plant was smoked with other plant fibers, or crudely rolled by itself and smoked. Tobacco leaves would also be applied to open wounds to promote healing, applied to the brow to relieve headaches, chewed to relieve toothaches, and more. It is believed that some Arawak people emigrated to Cuba and the Caribbean prior to the arrival of Columbus, as the Taino people who greeted him spoke an Arawakan language. With the Taino people came the introduction of tobacco seeds to the Caribbean. When Columbus arrived in 1492, the Taino people offered tobacco as a gift to the settlers, as well as showing the Spaniards how to grow and cultivate tobacco. Now, it is absolutely worth mentioning that European settlers committed many atrocities against indigenous peoples throughout the exploration of the New World. I encourage you to do your own research on the matter, as glossing over it briefly in this video will not do it justice. Tobacco started to take off in Europe after Hernán Cortés brought seeds back to King Charles V of Spain in 1518. Spanish settlers began cultivating tobacco in 1520. Due to effects such as decreased hunger as well as increased alertness and stamina, tobacco was given to field workers who were actively cultivating the plant. With tobacco now reaching as far as India, China, and Japan, it was quickly becoming a cash crop. This led to settlers at Jamestown, Virginia cultivating tobacco in 1612, with profitability paving the way for the founding of the American colonies. We've talked about tobacco, but where exactly did cigars come from? Technically, the Taino people used archaic cigars, crudely rolled with tobacco leaves and other dried herbs. In 1676, the modern cigar industry was born in Sevilla, Spain. Factories opened around Europe with thousands of laborers throughout the late 1600s and early 1700s. In 1717, King Felipe V monopolized the cigar industry in Cuba, centralizing all cultivation and trade. Farmers who used tobacco medicinally faced punishment as severe as execution, and did not receive any of the profits. This helped to ferment the growing disdain Cuban people had for the Spanish crown. 100 years later, in 1817, the Cuban cigar market would be reopened under King Ferdinand VII, but the damage in relations had already been done. After the market became free in Cuba, tobacco exports would flourish, leading to a new era of tobacco consumption. It is believed that 7 out of every 10 American men were regular cigar smokers in 1905. From this wave of success came recognizable cigar brands of today, like Partagas in 1827. In the 1830s, Dutch-born maker Gustav Bach invented the cigar band to differentiate his cigars from other exports to Europe. However, this individuality would not last long, as by 1855 most cigars were shipped with bands. By 1859, the production of Cuban tobacco had doubled from the reopening of the market. In 1898, the United States would enter war with Spain, ultimately taking control of Cuba upon the conclusion of the war. In the early 1900s, consumption of cigars began to slow. In 1905, there were over 70,000 cigar factories registered with the United States government, with an estimate of about 30,000 for unregistered factories. However, with the onset of World War I, increased industrialization, and the Great Depression starting in 1929, cigar use plummeted as consumers gravitated towards cigarettes, which were cheaper and more readily available. This would ultimately have a negative impact on the Cuban cigar industry and the cigar industry in general. In 1959, Fidel Castro would come into power in Cuba, ending foreign control of the country. Castro would abolish individual brands and nationalize the Cuban cigar industry. Brands would be reintroduced just a year later in 1960, but formerly private tobacco companies remained nationalized. This would lead to a mass exodus of Cuban cigar makers to nearby countries such as Nicaragua, Honduras, and the Dominican Republic. In 1962, Cuban imports would be embargoed by John F. Kennedy, ending legal exports of Cuban cigars to the United States. This embargo would be eased in the early 2010s, but was re-established in 2017 and remains in place today. In 1966, Cohiba was established as a brand exclusively for Fidel Castro and his high-ranking officials in the Cuban government. In 1994, the Cuban government would establish Habanos S.A. to distribute Cuban brands globally. In 2000, Altadis would purchase 50% of Habanos S.A. and bring many Cuban brands to the United States, although these cigars are Cuban in name only and cannot contain any tobacco grown in the country of Cuba. In the modern day, most cigars in the United States come from other Latin American countries like Nicaragua, as well as domestically from areas like the Connecticut River Valley. Cigars have had a long journey to get where they are today. Years of exploration, war, and politics have shaped the cigar into the rolled tobacco you can find in humidors around the country. For an experience as complex as smoking a cigar, the long and convoluted history is only fitting.